everyone, it's Elena, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about how I feel about Brexit because I got quite a few messages about this from my blog, so I thought it would just be easier to make a video about this rather than, type out an answer all the time. For those of you who don't know, I'm an EU student and I'm a first year undergraduate law student here at the University of Cambridge, and I'm originally from Germany. And I thought I would talk to you guys about how I feel about, the state of affairs right now regarding Brexit, and then how I would feel about a second referendum, and then what my preferred outcome would be. Please note that I am aware that my opinion doesn't really matter on this since I'm not a British citizen. And this is, just my opinion that I'm sharing because I got quite a few questions about it. But I do know that obviously the opinions of EU citizens aren't necessarily the primary concern of a British government, which obviously is there for its British citizens. So I am aware of that. So this is just my opinion and how I personally feel about Brexit. Okay, so now let's talk about how I feel about the politics surrounding Brexit at the moment here in the UK. Now, honestly, right now, I'm really shocked about how much uncertainty you can still have about such a big event less than 20 days away from when it should actually happen. To me, it is not really understandable how when you had so much time to, negotiate with the EU, bring proposals to Parliament, and then you end up here and you still don't actually have anything because Parliament just straight up rejected your deal twice. And right now we're still waiting to find out if Parliament would support leaving without a deal or not. I mean, we're hopefully going to find out tonight. But there's just so much uncertainty and there's just such a wide range of options of what could happen. And that is not great because time is literally running out. So, you do kind of want to know what's going to happen. Like, you do kind of want to know, will I need a visa? From when on will I need a visa? Because obviously, that depends on also like what is in the deal, or is there even gonna be a deal? Like, what do I have to do in order to be able to stay in this country to keep studying? How is it gonna impact me? Like, what programs are gonna stay? I mean, for me as a student, the Erasmus program is of course of big interest. How would no deal impact the Erasmus program? There's just so many questions that we don't really have answers to at the moment. And I mean, I'm somebody who keeps up with the news and who really, tries to prepare for this, but it's really hard to prepare for this if you don't really know what's going on. And I mean, I do keep up with what's going on in Parliament, etc., but even following that doesn't give you an answer of what you should prepare for. And that is scary because I think as a government, when you're less than 20 days away from an event like this, you should be able to give your citizens some very clear answers. And right now, I don't think the government is in a position to do that. And that is not great. And I mean, especially considering that this is a very, very big change. Okay, this is not some like minor traffic regulation act. This is a very, very big deal. And this is putting it mildly. So, you do need to know what is going on. And I find it quite disappointing and honestly quite irresponsible that we still don't have answers to some very, very basic questions. Like, is there going to be a no deal scenario? Or what kind of deal does Parliament want? Like, honestly, even if you are keeping up with the news a lot, right now you don't really know what's going on. For those of you guys who haven't been following the Brexit news recently, there was a vote in Parliament yesterday on whether Parliament would accept Theresa May's deal after she talked to the EU again and brought some legally binding assurances to Parliament, and Parliament rejected her deal, but with less of a difference in votes than the last time. But it was nonetheless a rejection, so today there's going to be a vote on whether Parliament would be fine with a no deal scenario. So that means if they can't, agree on a deal, then they're just going to leave the EU on the 29th of March, and there's not going to be a deal in place to, provide for trade arrangements or anything with the EU. So all of that would have to be negotiated later after the UK had already left the EU. Now, should Parliament say, no, we do not want a no deal scenario, then there would be another vote tomorrow on whether Parliament would like to extend Article 50. Now, Article 50 refers to Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, and it's the article by which countries can leave the EU. So they just, submit to the EU, we would like to leave, and then you start this leave period where, you negotiate your deals, etc. And there's a possibility to extend that period, but all EU member states would have to agree to such an extension, and the UK would obviously have to give a reason. Why do you want to extend it? And some people are guessing that, oh, maybe there's going to be a general election, or maybe there's going to be a second referendum. There are loads of possibilities why you could extend it, but obviously the EU would have to agree to this. So this is where we are right now, and it's quite honestly unclear what's going to happen next, and that is quite scary. I also wanted to talk to you guys about my thoughts on a second referendum because I know that this is something that has been talked about a lot, and some people are saying it would be super undemocratic, other people are saying it's absolutely necessary in order to, really determine whether Brexit is the right thing. And for me personally, I would be in favor of having a second referendum, and I know my opinion on this doesn't count and I wouldn't get to vote in a second referendum, but personally I think a second referendum would be a really good choice, because during the first referendum there were false promises being used, and that only came out after people voted, and that is just not fair. If you're voting based on an assumption that those numbers are correct and then it actually turns out they just made it up, that is really not fair. Also, it was completely unclear what was meant by leaving the European Union. Now you may think, okay, it's pretty clear, right? Like, we just leave. Yeah, but how do you leave? Do you leave with a deal? If you do, what kind of deal? Like, what kind of arrangement are we looking for? Are we looking for a very close relationship with the European Union? Are we looking for like a Norway style agreement, a Canada style agreement? What are we looking for? It was not clear that if we would leave with a deal, what kind of deal that meant, or if it just meant we don't leave with a deal, we just, you know, we just leave and no deal is in place. Like, what is meant by that? Because there are different degrees of Brexit, you could say. You know, a lot of people talk about a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit, and that is true. There are different degrees of how close you will be to the European Union after Brexit. And it was absolutely unclear in that referendum how close the relationship with the European Union would be after leaving the EU. And how is that a truly democratic referendum? If the campaigns weren't fully transparent because there were lies being told, if people weren't really informed, because democracy is also about making an informed choice. You're not really able to fully exercise your ability to vote if you don't have all the facts. You know, it's just not a fair choice because you don't actually know everything. And so I don't think it would be completely undemocratic. Also, what's important to consider is this referendum was non-binding. So, you know, some people may not have gone out to vote because they were like, well, it's non-binding, you know? And you know, there might be some people who would be inclined to change their mind on how important it is to vote. Would they have the chance to vote in a second referendum? So I don't think a second referendum would be undemocratic. You know, yes, it might overrule the opinion that a country showed 2 years ago, but democratic societies are entitled to change their minds. That is the reason why you don't have one election once a century, but, you know, every few years, because you are supposed to hold your government accountable by voting. And you are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to say, well, I thought this policy objective was great, but actually it's not. So I'm going to show that I don't want this anymore by voting differently this time. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind in a democracy. You are allowed to do that. And you are not bound by decisions that were made years ago. Because in a democracy, every few years, you can vote again and you can show that you feel differently about a topic. And that is not in any sense undemocratic. In fact, that is very democratic. So really, I don't see the argument about why a second referendum would be undemocratic. And I think it would just bring a lot more clarity to the situation and also make it a lot fairer to voters, because they would actually know what options are on the table, you know, with a deal, without a deal, or we just stay. And then they would actually be able to make a more informed choice, and we would actually also, you know, get a result that is a lot more valid, because we would know that people had a full understanding of what they were voting for and that they had a real chance to understand what leaving the EU actually entailed. Okay, so now I talked to you guys about how I feel about the current politics surrounding Brexit and a second referendum, and now I also wanted to share with you guys what I hope is going to happen. And I know that this may not be very realistic, but personally I do hope that the UK stays in the EU, because I personally love the EU. I'm a really big fan, and I think there's so much about the EU that is just amazing. I'm not saying the EU is perfect, it definitely isn't, but I think there is so much to it that just makes it worth staying in it. One of the things that I want to point out is that the EU is not just about goods and services and, you know, open borders. The EU is actually also a community of values, and those are some values which are pretty important to us, and they should be really important to everybody watching this video. If you never like looked at, you know, like the concept of the EU in much detail, let me just give you a quick overview of the fundamental values of the EU, and I'm just gonna read them out from the website of the EU. If you're interested, I'm also gonna link this in the info box below, and you can find more detailed information on the website of the EU. Okay, so some of the values that the EU is committed to are human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and human rights. Does that sound important? Hopefully, because it really is important. All of these are. And all of these are very important for your daily life. You may think, oh, you know, those are very abstract concepts, but in reality, those are things that affect our daily lives a lot. and having, you know, an intergovernmental organization like the EU stand up for these values is also quite important. And we often forget how much of a privilege it can be to have these things in our lives. But I think a community of states which commits to these values, that is a lot stronger as a commitment than just having a government say, we'll stick to this. Because you have many states backing these values. And you know, you have this group of states which will hold your country accountable to this and say, we want you to comply with this because you agree to this and your citizens expect it. And that is a big deal, and it's really important that these things are protected. So don't think, you know, it's just about open borders, goods and services, and basically trade. The EU is about a lot more. Also, if you're a student and you ever went on an exchange program, or, you know, went on some like travel offer for young students, etc., maybe check where that funding for these projects comes from, because a lot of the times the EU is involved. Actually, when I checked, I was surprised how many of the things that I did in high school were connected to the EU. And I know that a lot of these things wouldn't have been possible without the EU. So I'm super grateful for, you know, having had these opportunities. And I know I wouldn't have had them had I not lived in the EU. So, you know, really consider how much the EU has actually done for you. And very often it's not super visible, but actually the EU helps us all quite a lot. Also, one thing that I wanted to point out is that I think the EU has really, at least for me, impacted how I see other countries and other societies. And this is something that I really only realized when I moved away from the EU. So for those of you who don't know, when I was 16, I moved to Hong Kong and I lived there for 2 years because I went to a boarding school there. And that experience first made me realize what it means when you can't just hop on a train and cross the border, because you need to apply for a visa like a month in advance. And I had never really had that experience, because when I lived in Germany, you know, you could, you know, feel like, oh, let's go to Paris. So you just book a train on Friday evening and then you would spend Saturday in Paris. Like, there was no problem. You didn't even need to bring your passport. Your ID card is enough. And that is such a privilege, and I never realized how much of a privilege this is until I lived in Hong Kong and I realized, oh my god, like, you can't, like, you know, be spontaneous and just do that, because you actually, like, you know, need a visa and you need to think about this like a long time before actually doing it. And you know, you might think, oh, okay, so that's just, you know, travel convenience. But not really. I think it also changes the way you look at countries, because when countries are so easily accessible to you, you are so much more likely to visit them, and you feel more like you're all part of a big community, rather than, you know, all being like a separate country where, you know, you just go as a tourist but you're never really truly engaging with the culture. No. Cultures are mixing so much easier when borders are open, and you feel so much more connected to people. It's crazy because I don't really feel like an absolute foreigner in countries in the EU. I also don't feel like, you know, oh, I'm a citizen of this country. But somehow I feel like I'm still connected to this country in a way. And it's hard to explain this, but I just feel like I am so much more open to different countries, to different societies, to different cultures because of the EU and what it has made possible for me. And I guess this is really well reflected in the motto of the EU, which is United in Diversity. So yeah, from the perspective of an EU student, I would say it's working very well. And I'm really grateful for all the things that the EU has done for me and how, you know, it has impacted my life. But obviously there's a lot more that the EU does for its citizens. And if you guys are interested, the EU actually has a website section where they explain what they do for their citizens. And it's quite short, like you can just, you know, scroll through it. And they really explain to you what they're actually doing for you. I'm gonna link this in the info box below for you guys if you guys are interested. And I would highly recommend reading this should there be a second referendum before you cast your vote, because there's so much that EU citizenship offers you. And you know, also for me, when I did research for this video and I read through this very short section, which is really just, you know, a very quick summary of what the EU does for citizens, I was so surprised to see how many things the EU actually does for us. And so yeah, should there be a second referendum, please give this a read before you vote, because there's so much that the EU does. And you might not know about most of these things, but you nonetheless benefit from them. So yeah, that's how I feel about Brexit. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I would really love to hear what you think is the most likely outcome out of all of this. If you think there's going to be a Brexit, if yes, what kind of Brexit, or is there going to be no Brexit? What is your opinion on this? I would really love to hear it. And there's a little poll up here. And I would just, you know, love to see what you guys think. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit different from what I normally talk about, but I thought since I got a lot of messages about this, there would be some interest in it. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a nice day. Bye!